Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hey everybody. I wanted you to hear today's guest because so many years passed with my family referring to Mom as crazy long before we were aware of dementia or how it was affecting her brain. Unfortunately, society does the same thing to others that are misunderstood mentally. Mom became a high-functioning woman living with bipolar disorder, also known as manic depression. We normalized her highs and lows for so long, we dismissed the early signs of dementia. I believe this disorder is better understood by those who live close to see into the eye of the emotional storm. But before we go further on that, in just a moment, Jarett Leger will share his experience with mental health. Jarett is an artist of many talents, including painting, photography, and filmmaking. Along his journey of pursuing multiple creative fields, he has encountered many colleagues and become very close to those who struggle with mental illness. Jarett feels it goes hand in hand with the self-label of artist. He found himself in a caregiving type position many times by helping to prevent self-harm and self-destructive behaviors from highly talented and exceptional individuals. Jarett, thanks for coming on with me today. So before your career evolved and you found yourself in that area, where did you grow up?
I grew up in South Louisiana. So I grew up in the country, deep in the country. Most of my family grew up kind of like in the ghettos, but we kind of got away from all that, which is really awesome. So yeah, it was a very swampy existence, but it was peaceful, you know.
So what made you decide to move to Austin, Texas?
Pursuing film, I had an option to move here. I had a family member end up. It was between here and I just wanted to go to either that or Alaska because I knew someone else there.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, a big difference. I was like, I just wanted to get out so bad, you know, just try something new. And yeah, I came here, fell in love, been here 8 years now.
Nice. So as you got in and you got settled and you start working and expanding, what was it, something that just kind of intuitively started to happen where you started to notice differences as working with colleagues?
I think the whole caregiving thing starts a lot earlier than that. The reason why I kind of alluded to, you know, people growing up in poverty is because a lot of mental health issues, you know. And so my mom, her name's Karen, which is funny. She's like the most caring person you ever meet. Like very, very, like everyone goes to her for all of their problems. She's always been a caretaker when, you know, her mom had dementia as well. And then my stepfather's mom, like she just took care of everybody. Wow. And so I guess I kind of inherited that. So I have a high sensitivity to like seeing that and being like, I feel that, like I have empathy or sympathy towards that.
Right.
And then a lot of people in my family had things, but because mental health is not like, no one really talked about it, especially back in the late 90s or so, early 90s. It just wasn't a thing, you know. Mm-hmm. And so as I got older, I started seeing people behaving weird and then people turning to drugs, alcohol, whatever. And I'm like, something more going on here. Mm-hmm. So I got obsessed with psychology at 15. Just started reading everything. Yeah.
That's good. You know, and it's interesting. I love the way you say that because back in the 80s and 90s, people weren't really focused on that mental health. Right. It was the response of they're just crazy. Mm-hmm. And we either learned to live in that crazy or we avoided them, which is a sad thing. Right. So many people get dismissed that way. So it's in your DNA. I can't avoid that without saying that. It literally is in your DNA. I think people learn, and it's not just learning how to be compassionate, but I think people eventually learn, because that's something that I look at between my sisters and I. How is it that I was able to pick up on some of these things and they were not? Is it just because we normalized things for too long with my mother? Is it just because we see what we want to see? You know, it's just all different sorts of areas.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a luxury to be, I don't want to use the word sane, but just kind of mentally healthy enough, or maybe you put your own issues on a back burner to put people first, behind empathy. So when you kind of feel that clear-mindedness, it's easy to open up, but at the same time, you do kind of push your own issues aside. Like my mom's a great example. Like she would just build up in stress. You know, she was like, you could tell she's taking on the weight of the world. And for me, it was the same. Like I was just quiet about myself, but then very like I would always help out a friend, you know, a cousin, someone came over having an issue, like, let's talk about it. It's about you. So you become an observer. It's like you're watching a movie. It's not your movie, it's their movie. You know?
Right. It's not about me, it's about them.
Right.
That's awesome. And that's what you need to, I guess, be able to be in that emotional storm with them, to be able to observe and see what direction, how to even read behavior, because I think that's one of the things I eventually started to do. I started to observe way more often instead of just asking questions first.
Right.
And if I couldn't understand a behavior, then I went to questioning.
Yeah. And then to go even deeper, I think, so there is personality traits associated with caregivers. It's called high in agreeableness. So it's actually more common. I know there's more women caretakers, and then typically people who are healthcare professionals are women. It's natural. And it's like you avoid conflict, but you're really good at making friends, or you want to welcome everyone in.
Right.
And so when I found out this thing, I was like, oh, I'm definitely that. Like, highly agreeable person, hate conflict. So I even became a caretaker to bullies, just because I was able to step back, you know. And there was times where I'd get frustrated. I kind of build up this frustration, and I would just like call someone out on something they were doing that was just mean. I was like, you're just a really cruel person. And they would step back like, whoa. And then it would be a reframe for them. They would totally see me as someone different, as opposed to just me like battling. I took a back seat and say, oh, no conflict first. Breathe, assess the situation. Now what can I do? And then I was able to see people's like human side do that. You know?
That's awesome.
Which I think is very rare. I think it's weird going through life like that, when everyone else is kind of like unconscious and just kind of steamroll and just make a mess of things, where you're like, I'm just trying to clean things up. Like,
well, so many of us are going through life in that me first mode. I'm meeting my needs. I'm meeting and just my wants. And some of us have, you know, reasons that we're striving for, and others just oblivious to others' needs.
Exactly.
So it's definitely a skill.
Absolutely. And I think even people with mental health issues, I noticed that you can't get angry at them even though you want to, but it's not their fault that they have the blinders on. It's like they don't have the luxury of, like my brother, you know, has, you know, his own issues. He's so hyper focused on like survival that I would never expect him to say, wow, man, I'm really happy for you. That's cool that you did this. He would never blatantly say that. It would either be like, and I accept that fully, because I know that's him, that's his personality, that's how he does it. But then like if I post something, like I posted the poster for the movie we made, and like he shared it, he's like, check out what my brother's doing. It's like, oh, he has a different way of doing it. But he just doesn't have the capacity to like, I guess, like put other people first. It's always like me and protective, and I think that's actually more for people who have trauma, as opposed to just like, you know, because I have a lot of friends who are like depressed and stuff, and they're really good at that. They're really good at like building you up and everything. But sometimes you come across like really good friends who just, you almost feel like you don't exist around them. And especially in the creative world, like everyone's so go. And then they're like, they want to take you on an adventure. Let's go do this. Help me record this music, or help me record this video. And it's like, they're so obsessive. And then you have a situation where it's like, they get really depressed and they go to you. So you feel like I'm only a pawn in their game. It feels like that. So it takes a lot longer for them to step down and be like, I really appreciate you. And in some cases, it's more like they have to completely break down and apologize severely, before they're able to like say like, no, I really appreciate what you're doing. And I've gotten that so many times that like, it's hard to accept that, like the compliments and from people who have not never, but for the most part have not really shown like an appreciation for how much I've actually helped them. That makes sense. I've had friends like buy me books and stuff. Like I have a friend, she was like really depressed, like clinical depression. And she would tell me and my ex at the time, she was like, I gotta come over. Like we gotta watch a movie or something. It's like we knew. Like she's gone through a major existential issue right now. So she'd come over and just like we'd focus on her. And then like a few weeks later she'd come with like books. I'm like, what's this? Like this is a thank you. It's like, oh, it's all, like never expecting it because it's just you want to help your friends. You just want to help your friends. And then you get that appreciation. And it's like, wow, they really do appreciate this. Like this is important to them way beyond what you think. It's not, because I know other people who they help their friends out, or like even I'll have like lunch with a few friends and maybe both of them are highly creative and they're kind of going at each other. It's just like the way you do with friends, like pick at each other, kind of make fun or whatever. But from my vantage point, I'm like, man, you guys are really hurting each other right now. So like I already knew like I'm the one who's really seeing this, And so like then I know like, okay, well, both of those friends, even though like them two together might be able to have like a shallow conversation about their problems, but I know that for me it's a deeper conversation about those problems. And I had to like really embrace that that's a role. It's a role in my tribe.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna be that person. Like I'm the one that gets the text at 2:00, like the drunk text.
Definitely.
Like I'm feeling, so bad or whatever, because I built that level of trust as opposed to like a shallow level of trust. So yeah.
Well, you have that.
Going off, but like yes, that's like foundational of like kind of where I'm coming from.
You definitely have that. I can already feel it. You definitely have that level of empathy, and you tune in, and that's the big deal. You're tuning in and being sensitive to others' feelings. Yeah. That's something that I still to this day struggle with my mom, just because I want to see the emotions. I want to see reactions, but positive reactions. Right. The loving, affectionate reactions, not the disgust or frustration, anger because I said no to a dessert, or I said, something like that.
Right.
But it's that feeling, the emotions that I don't see coming from her. And when you're a child growing up into that, and you mentioned you noticed that when you were 15, that difference, seeing that with her and watching her go through life with a lot less emotions than I would see others have. And just, it didn't seem, I guess because I grew up with it, that was my normal.
Right.
But getting around other people, it was like, wait a minute. There's so many other people who expressed emotions regularly with inappropriate ways. If a baby's born and people are tearing up and crying or expressing joy, or if something else happens sad, they're able to express sadness. It's just the range of emotions is.
Were you still always able though to emote normally, even though you didn't have like so if your mom was one way, were you still very much you, or did you kind of like fall into?
I kind of adapted as I needed to, because I did not understand her emotions. If I was aware of something, if she had a bad day at work, then okay, she's frustrated from work, or she's angry situation. So being able to separate that and step out, okay, these are my emotions and I can tell she's having a bad day. I felt like I was having a bad day with her.
Right.
For a while, for a really long time, until I did reach that point in life where I learned how to become that observer and almost had to detach.
That's a great word. Yeah, detach. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about today. And I'm glad we quickly got on the subject, because that's where I'm at now. It's like you go for so long, you start to question. That's why I got into like wanting to understand why my personality was this way. It was like, it's unfair to give so much. I don't want to I don't want to sound like insensitive.
No.
But, you know, it's like, it does seem unfair sometimes to be the one that feels like you're the only one giving.
Right.
And then also justifying, well, I don't expect anyone else to give because they're in a hard place. And so my role is to only give and not expect. And it can be a very spiritual thing, but then you can't deny the human aspect of like, well, I have needs as well.
Exactly.
So then you start to build resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have to deal, how do I deal with resentment? So you kind of, because you're dealing with people with mental illness, you become mentally ill.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the human response.
Yeah, exactly. So like for me, I realized, wow, it was a certain point, I think it was like 2 years ago, it just hit me. I'm like, about 90% of the people I'm around have problems, you know? And I feel healthy I'm like, I'm not healthy though. It's just, at least my persona is built in such a way that I need to be the strong one. You know, I'm going to be the smart one, the one who understands psychology, one who can actually be there, give people space to be themselves. Because you get that a lot. Like, I have friends that post, like, I can talk to you because you get me fully, like, down to their depths. And I'm like, okay, cool, I can play that role. But then who has that for me? Yeah. Who's going into my depths, you know? So it's really difficult, especially being a creative type. I'm also highly open. It's another personality trait. So it makes an artist, like, you're so broad, you're so vast that you have depth. And so you kind of feel like you can't connect with people unless they can connect with that depth. So yeah, you know, I struggle with that. I'm like, well, how much am I giving up? And my brother coming to my life, I was like, cool, like I have someone I could relate to. He's going to live with me, even though he's 21 at the time. I'm 10 years older than him. And it's like, we're both Cajun, you know, the way we joke with each other. Everything just felt like it was awesome. It was like very good blend there. But then living with him after a while, you start to see these things, like real things you're struggling with. Like, with, it was definitely trauma. He was discharged from the Air Force. Like, he's really smart. You know, he got there, but then, you know, because of his mental health, he had to leave. So staying with him, I kind of watched him not go downhill, but like, you know, go into those depressive phases and stuff. Like, okay, I naturally went into the role, but then he started to get very abrasive. Like, as he got more comfortable with his job, making money, he got cockier. His more like alpha mentality came out along with the trauma. And it's like, okay, now this is becoming like hostile. And then it got to a point where it's like, okay, am I just going to be an empathic caretaker and let him punch on me like a punching bag? Or am I going to fight back with maintaining compassion? Right. So you start questioning that word. What does compassion mean? What is that? Like, what is... And I was like, there was a good analogy I heard a long time ago. It was from a rabbi who said, you know, if there's different kinds of love, but I think a true love is like if your kid keeps on eating McDonald's and gets fat, yeah, you give them this pleasure if they get to eat McDonald's and that makes them happy. That's compassion, but then they're getting sick, right, and getting diabetes and unhealthy. Yeah, so it's like, okay, what's compassion? It's like, oh, you have to have some level of like balance between it. And so I started kind of just checking him back and checking him every time he would say something extremely mean, like cut through, like he would just really cut through, and I would just check him, you know. I was like, okay, I'm learning step by step how to match him, realizing you can't only be compassionate with people for them to understand. And the weird thing is, he became empathetic towards me because I wasn't just being another thing to press up against his mental illness. It was like, hey, I love you, but you're being an asshole. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know if we can curse on here. I was trying to keep it down, yeah. But that was eye-opening. That was like a huge transition for me. It's like, and then another friend, she's a lot younger, she's in her 20s and having the same issues, you know, like you feel like they only want you and then they're like, they scrap you. They're like, they forget about you for a little while and then they come back and they tell you like things like, oh, you abandoned me or whatever, you know, especially people with borderline. It's like really tough. Yeah.
Well, and that's where you build in boundaries.
Exactly.
And you want that natural response is, I want to be there for them. You have it in you to be there for them. And you identify that they need this at some point in time, regardless if they can see it in you as well, that you need something emotionally, you know, from them as well. But you have to put that boundary. I had to learn how to put that boundary that I can only do so much and I can only give so far of myself, because I can physically do the caring, whichever it entailed, laundry, showering, you know, meals,
Right.
that kind of thing. But when it came to giving of myself emotionally, I absolutely had to find that boundary. I just, because then, like you said, I felt like I was now being affected by it in a negative way. Now I'm the one that's feeling depressed. Now I'm the one that's feeling like something's not mentally right. I'm the one that's turning to more than one glass of wine in the evening to relax, you know?
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
something that you have to have that boundary. You have to find the balance. And it's awesome that he learned, you taught him in a way that how to be empathetic
Right.
in return.
And I'm not sure how it is in your mom's case, but like, did she have a social circle? Did she have a lot of friends? Did she have
She started out
support?
with a lot of friends, and a lot of those friends were actually coworker friends. And as she went through her transition, that ring of friends got smaller and smaller and smaller. And especially when she retired and started to step away, she lost that routine. And so she really fell off her normal balance routine. And those friends just slowly pulled away and stopped coming around.
Did they know she was struggling with it?
They didn't know, but like what many people experience, and definitely what our family experiences, that when you start getting in those uncomfortable areas, you know, after a while, you don't want to visit. You don't want to,
Right.
You enter the house and the house is a mess. You know, it definitely showed someone is depressed. It's not just stepping away from a long time routine and now it's like, what do I do now? I don't have a life to live, or I don't have focus, you know, because that, as a teacher for 32 years, that was her passion.
Right.
And then stepping away from that, it was nothing on top of other things.
She had a framework for the longest time.
Well, exactly. So going from something to nothing. And so friends gradually who used to come and visit, and then she stopped wanting to leave the house to go visit and go meet up for that happy hour or go meet up for dinner or lunch somewhere else. It was always wanting them to come to her, to the house. So there wasn't that give and take anymore. It was just take.
That's what I'm worried
And then
about too.
so people eventually stopped coming. It was either too hard to see her living the way she was living, or they didn't have that emotional capacity to keep giving to her.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what I want to ask, because that's very common, I think. And I'm trying to, I guess, put that in my brother's head. He moved away. He has his own place. He's a roommate, and I told him, first thing you do is let him know what you're going through, right? Because like he could easily close off even at his age, you know. And we're kind of like this anyway. It's how my family is. Like all the Legers are like this. Like we're kind of reclusive, but then we become extroverted. But he goes through these bouts of like just like severe depression and closed off, and then you see it on Facebook like in capital letters like lonely, you know, and you're like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be getting messages soon. You can feel that build up, that tension, and he's like, you guys should come over. Like, okay, so I invite my friends over and we go and try to help with that. But I'm thinking like I'm 10 years older than him and I'm moving forward a lot, and he's new to the city, and it's like I'm worried that he doesn't put that effort to make real like steady friendships, you know. And I think for him, I just kept, you know, telling him like he's been wanting to do something, not be a police officer. I think he wants to be like a fireman. I was like, you need that kind of structure, like you need that kind of support or whatever, because otherwise you're just gonna wither away. It's like, yeah, sure, you have a nice job, you know, everything's working out for you, but like mental health wise, you should be in an environment where you're not just relying on me.
Yeah.
You know. So I think that's helping. And I guess that's just a message for anyone, like for depression in general. Sometimes you have to force yourself out there, whether it's exercise. And for him, I think it's like just being engaged with something that's kind of like
Project related.
that's like the military, but not, you know.
Right.
But that is my biggest fear, because like I look at it now, it's like, yeah, he's young, he has a lot of vitality, but even now he's having these issues of being this depressed, like severe depression. Convince him, now he sees a therapist, which is great, but then I'm always thinking long term. It's like,
You have to.
where is he going to go? So I'm always trying to help him, you know, pragmatically, like, you know. And I don't tell him like, in order to be happy, you should have friends. Like, it's more like, you know, what are you doing? Like, are you dating, stuff like that? And it's like he has these kind of short-term relationships that just like he blows through it and stuff. And it's like, if that keeps happening, then he's always going to come towards me. It's like I want him to be self-reliant. That's pretty difficult. And I guess it kind of ties back to with like maybe it's a selfishness on my part, which is like that's a burden. You know, it feels like a burden.
Right.
Even though I'm not going to do anything to step away from him, but I have that thought like if I don't help him get established, am I going to be the one that have to like drive him to hospital and all this stuff? You know, like
Yeah.
I'm worried about the severe, because we're not quite sure what he has. It's just, it's cumbersome enough, you know, to be a serious issue, you know.
But that's
it's
what,
very serious.
as you continue with this scenario, that's what many caregivers find themselves in, that situation of burnout.
Right.
Because that's when you give and you give and you give and you don't get a balance of give and take. And then you become overwhelmed. And once you reach that point of burnout and overwhelm, and you still try to push through it, and that's where the situation switches, and it's now you need to worry about your own personal care of, because there, and like I said before, I realized at some point once I started to have my own mental switch and become the observer, I started to see it in so many more people. I could go in a grocery store and overhear conversations with, you know, parents and their children or young teenage children or even couples. And I started picking up on all these things, and it's everywhere. And then I realized, oh, I need to really be careful, because I wanted to reach out. And I've been in the grocery store in the bread aisle, having conversations with total strangers. Yeah. And it's just, it's like you're drawn to it. Right. You're pulling it. It's part of it is they're drawn to you, and part of it is this energy that goes out to them that says, I'm here for you.
Yeah. And that is another fear too, because I have instances where I became, you know, best friends to narcissists, like very destructive people. And that's a huge symptom of somebody who's highly agreeable. You don't see all those red flags. No. And so like I have to distinguish, because I have my own personal trauma associated with, is this person going to go down the deep end and just try to destroy me, whether it's my character or within our social group. Like there's all these things that someone can do. And like my brother, I sent him a few articles and was like, well, which one of these, before he went to therapy, like, which one of these do you think you are? Because you obviously, because we talk in depth, like we can get into real depth about it, but it's kind of detached. He's like, he talks about himself as if it's someone else. Oh, right. Someone else's problem. Yeah. And then I gave him like borderline. He's like, there's a lot of these, but not much. And then he's like, well, obviously depression. He's like, never thought bipolar, but he's like 100% vulnerable narcissism. And that changed my, like, because I had a situation where I was best friends with someone who was definitely narcissistic. It's a horrible thing. Yes. I don't know if you've known any narcissists. Yes. So that coupled with mental issues can be the hardest drain. I think with my brother, no one really knows right now what he has, which is good. It's a breath of fresh air. But you know, there was times where he'd push away so hard. And like, I like the connection we have, the camaraderie. You know, we are a family. But then there's that other abrasive part where it's like, you want to just yell at him, like, how do you expect to ever make friends if you keep acting this way? Exactly. And so he'll tone it down. Later on, he won't really necessarily apologize, but he'll come back later and be like, it's like, I can't believe I really was treating people so bad. Like, he's talking about himself kind of like disconnected. And so I guess my point is, like, I don't want to feel myself being just a caretaker in that relationship. Yeah. And I want to fall just in line with like, well, I'm going to be the brother that's like so good to you that you can always come to me, but also you can be so comfortable around me that you can still be abusive and not expect me to walk away, because he's so sensitive to that, you know, that abandonment. It's funny. I'm talking about him, and you realize there's so much going on with him. But this is the case. I don't want to sound like I'm just pointing the finger at him. We all have issues in my family. You know, it's a whole long line of mental issues, whether like depression's a big one, anxiety disorder, OCD. I was diagnosed with Jarett syndrome at a young age, kind of went away. All these neurological things. So like we all have that understanding, like, yeah, we're that kind of family, you know.
Yeah.
But for him, it's so specific that he is the black sheep, you know. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, it's a feeling of I want family, I want to connect. I don't want to be your therapist, but I have to be in a way.
Yeah.
Like I have to be there when you're ready for something, when you have some kind of need, right? So yeah, that's where I'm at right now, you know.
Well, and that's what we kind of do when you step into that role of caregiver. We start using those words, I have to. And that's what I was told by a friend of mine, that when I started saying that, I have to do this, I have to do that. And when the first time she said, no, you don't. I couldn't make that. I know. I couldn't make
right
that
there.
disconnection to it. I was like, of course I have to. This is my family. This is my mother in this case. I know for you, your brother, but you can't imagine stepping away.
No.
You can't. Because then I'm become the bad guy. I'm the person that's horrible for turning my back on. Just like, no, it still is a choice. It's a choice.
Right.
And knowing that it's a choice, you still have to place boundaries around that choice. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
Because you just want to be there for them. You just want to help them to get through whatever they need to get through. And when you're in the midst of it, you completely go, what I've started realizing, I slipped into autopilot. I just did what had to be done.
Right.
Until I found myself so exhausted. Like, I didn't do anything. I wasn't physically. I've done yard work. I've built, the flower beds and pulling stones. And at the end of the day of that, physically,
good.
Well, some of it feels good, but after a long weekend of doing it, you're physically exhausted. And I've had moments where I've been in this give emotionally, where I have been that exhausted. I felt like I did a physical workout.
It's emotional. That's the thing. It's different.
It's
because
a dream.
Because this is a perfect example. Like, let's say, like a scenario, he messages some passive thing like, you guys can come over this weekend, but I know you won't. And so then, okay, now I've obligated. And then, and so you go, to his gathering, and he's like, maybe bummed out or whatever, and say, okay, so like it's still just kind of, it's about him. And then it's like I have to be kind of suppress what I'm feeling, right? So it's, I don't want to use my boundaries now because we're trying to enjoy ourselves, whatever.
Right.
And then you build all that resentment, and then that doesn't just go away. You got that all week because, okay, I don't want to, like, I'm feeling angry, and I'm feeling like internally I'm justified for having these emotions, and they're deeper than just like maybe one thing, he said or whatever. It goes deeper to thinking this is our dynamic. And then you start, that resentment builds because you're thinking, is this our relationship? Is it always going to be every time we hang out I have to feel this? And so that, then the guilt builds up, and then you go off with other friends, and then your friends who are perfectly fine, they may do something kind of similar, like a passive pass, and it's just trigger. And then it's like, no, I got to keep this in. So then it's just on and on and on. It just never ends. And it's like, when do you get the chance to vent? And it's like, it's weird. Find myself like, because I've been loosely dating the last 3 years, but they're horrible because it's like, oh, I just have someone to talk to. So I get to vent it all out. And they're like, oh God, this guy.
We got
here. Yeah, exactly. But luckily I've had other friends where like we could just go deep and express. But like I find myself even now, I'm talking about all these things disconnectedly, but I can see how backed up it is.
Yeah.
It's like you can just feel like the resentment at the time when you should have like had that boundary, called them out and resolved something, as opposed to then just trying to save face and hoping, well, this is the relationship we're gonna have for forever. Like, let's keep it going. But you don't try to keep the dynamic of like, let me keep setting boundaries. Like, you don't really believe that it'll get better, even though I have set certain boundaries and it has worked. You still have that fear of like, well, I don't want to ruin his day. I don't want to be the reason why you know, they fall into depression or whatever, like, because I'm also a trigger. Like when you have someone who's dealing with abandonment, just being anyone who says one thing against them, not against, but just like, it could be anything, they can take it the wrong way. And so you're like, you're constantly having to have a totally separate relationship that tries to get away from the triggers.
Right. And you can't.
Exactly.
And that's when that resentment builds for so long. It doesn't matter whether you're dating or not, someone a colleague that you work with could trigger that emotion. And then you realize, for me, after a period of time, it was a situation that evolved, that finally someone else pointed out the emotional abuse factor. It was like, oh, I fell prey to that. I didn't even notice that. And it's after being in a situation like that for so long, that resentment built and built and built. And there's a codependency on that.
Yep. That's a good word. Yep. That
comes about. And you have to get to that point, or I had to get to the point where I had to disconnect. And that's the only word that I could come back to every time, because you go in and you get attached. So now I have to detach. Yeah. Or I go in and I get connected to that person and I feel like we're on that mental wavelength and everything's good, and then everything's not so good. So now I have to disconnect. Right. Just to keep that safe boundary going.
Yeah. And this is why I have so much respect for people who choose caregiving as a profession. Right. In some ways, actually, it is different. So I've known people who are clinical, like, psychologists, therapists, and I used to do Uber. I'd actually talk anyone I met that was therapists. I'd want to learn about them, you know. But even them who, like, it's not their family, eventually do attach, you know. And although they have great boundaries, they still have to see therapists as well. Absolutely. Just to help reset. And so that's, I guess, where it comes down for me. Going back to, you know, relationship with my brother, it's been just 2 years, and it's just been this dramatic thing from like, oh, I have someone here in Austin now whose family really connect, to like, oh no, there was an atomic bomb under all this, to like, okay, now it's leveling out. I'm helping him, but also I'm still trying to hang out with him, but now I'm just more vigilant. And so now I guess we're moving into a phase of like having to think in terms of what do caregivers do to maintain it, you know. And I think for me, it is kind of easy because he does do his own thing and I'm doing my own thing too. In the gap, I know it's building up for him, and then now he's always in my head. Like, I'm so responsible for him. So I have to I have to constantly be in the headspace of like, when should I put the boundary? Because I don't know. Like, this is new for me, totally new, to feel this responsible. Right. Because before it's like you kind of help people, you help your friends, but they go off and do their own thing. This one seems more severe. It's more immediate. Your brother. And it's my brother. Yeah, exactly. It's family. Yeah, exactly. And so that's what's great about doing this podcast now, because it's right there. Like, I'm right at that transition point from, not transition, I'm in the desert. I'm like, I'm just feeling my way around. Like, what does it mean to be, you know, a helper? Not, you know, I don't know what the term would be. Because I'm not a full caregiver, but then I do feel that heavy burden.
Well, and I was just going to ask you that. Do you see yourself as a caregiver?
Yeah, funny enough, I went through a long phase where I was like, I want to open up a art therapy studio where we just like throw paint in the walls and I let people punch the wall and cry and do whatever, you know, like, because it's great therapy, you know. And so yeah, no, I am a natural caregiver. You know, me and my mom were like two peas in a pod with that, but I'm a highly sensitive person, so to dedicate my life to it, you know, it's tough. So like when I kind of pick a few people and I'm like, I can put my energy there. And then some people, they kind of go overboard. Like, of course, family is always going to be like their number one, but with friends, I've been able to just completely cut out, you know, like just step away totally. Because I'm like, this is not beneficial. Like, nothing I'm saying is helping them. And, you know, it gets to a point where you feel like you're just there for when they need you. So like, yeah, I've gotten better at that. So my boundaries with friends or people in like the different worlds, like, because I make friends really fast. This is part of the problem. And then once they know I have depth and I do listen, then they latch on. and it could be kind of like you feel the obligation, but then you're like, well, I don't have to have this. Like, it's okay to do it and kind of fill it out and see, like, is this person gonna be a long-term friend, or are they just completely insane and like I should just step away altogether?
And that's the scary thing, because we want to stay protected, right? We don't want to invite something that's going to harm us,
right?
But at the same time, we still want to be connected.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I have my biggest boundary is drugs. So anybody who's addicted, I try to step away as quickly as possible. And that comes from my own personal issues, like my past with people. So that's just one thing that's like really strong, which is good. At least I have one very strong boundary. You know, it's like I'm not going to get associated with someone who's like, you know, a severe addict, you know, because that's something I can't really help them with.
No.
And I can tell them you should, you know, seek help or whatever, but they just never do. So then they just go to you, and it's like, well, at best I'm just someone who understands you. That's great, but I can't actually help you. That's different. And that's another big thing. I guess a great topic is what is a, because there are true caregivers who that's their profession, and then there's caregivers like us who kind of fall into it. I think a lot of people like us need to know the difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because
we're not getting paid for it. So
well, and that's one of the things I had to accept myself. I wanted to do everything, and I can only do so much.
Right.
I had to accept that I can only do so much. Even now, as my mother is finally settled into her community where she is, and she's getting the care she needs, the professional care that she needs in her memory care facility, I still feel like there's more that I should do.
Right. And that's the thing with family, because it isn't just like, okay, he fell out, like my brother came to my doorstep at 21, because I hadn't seen him, like I didn't really watch him grow into a teenager. He was kind of reclusive, but then you remember like what it was like growing up with him when he was 7, when he was a kid, and it's like you can't just detach from all those memories. And even though he's become a totally different person, and then you have to back up and say like, okay, I'm just dealing with a different situation. I can't have the luxury of the normalcy, right? And especially me being a person who's coming from a background of like, just I guess going to my past would be like come from a broken home. My dad had depression, so you know we go over for weekends and stuff, but he would just like drink a lot, sometimes just kind of be not there. We have to meet all of his crazy girlfriends. And so like I have this kind of like I love him. He's a great guy. I mean, he's an artist too. I got all my talent from him. He taught me a lot of Bob Ross skills and stuff. And he's a compassionate person too, but that one element of being like, you don't know, like, you know, almost getting in a car accident with him because he's drunk and we're 7, you know. So like I have a huge, that's why I say I don't have tolerance for recklessness. Right. So like that, I'm glad that boundary's hard. With my brother, my fear is he becomes reckless, and then I'm going to detach even further, because I just have this huge, it's a trigger for me. It's like I'm not getting involved with this because I know that thing never changes. You know, like I saw my dad from like when I was really young up until now, you know, he's older now, but just kind of like be disconnected. And then when you're in a certain situation, like if you're addicted or anything like that, it's like you step away from friends and family too, you know, and so that detachment's there. So like I worry about that. It's like, how much do I invest in a relationship? In other words, if I know I have to invest, I'm going to invest to the degree that my mom is happy I'm taking care of my family. But for me personally, I know that like if he gets arrested, like what am I going to do it? Like I have to ask those. That's a big question. Like if he gets in a fight, like one day I know he's going to get in a fight, break someone's nose. Like do I go out of my way and show him, well, you're always going to have someone to kind of like reinforce that behavior, or do I just let him be in jail? So that's a deeper level. Like that's
a good
deeper level of caregiving.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And I don't expect anyone to answer it. It's something I have to. And I think, and for me, and I've been through enough situations where I have had to help people at the very rock bottom, bring them back up. And in that situation, you do kind of just turn off yourself. You go in, you do the job, you clean up the mess, and then after you try to talk about it. But I don't have enough reference experience to say that just talking about it is going to keep them away from doing something destructive again.
It does. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
and that's where it's just like any parent, you give them enough room to learn and grow, and you're always there to let them know that, hey, I'm here, I love you no matter what. But at some point, they do need to learn on their own that actions do have consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's ironic that I'm saying this because it's something that I remember it as a teenager myself, flip and have children myself. Now I'm trying to teach my sons.
Right.
And then caring for mom, it's like I had to flip yet again. And now I'm having to reinforce something with her, behaviors that she can't do because there's a consequence for an action.
Right.
And it's, well, how far do I let her go? Because then it comes right back to that level of compassion. You know, do I let her do this and allow her to harm herself just so she can see that that was a bad thing?
Yeah.
Or do I intervene in time to stop the action from going any further?
Have you ever done that? Have you ever talked to her, like set things up to where, like, I'm just letting you know that I won't help you with this, and this. I've done that with my brother.
I've said
Cross
that
the line.
there has been moments where I've been frustrated, and I have made a comment where I just want you to know this isn't going to end well. This isn't going to be good. I know that, because it, of course, in her area of dementia, I could say it today, and tomorrow
Right.
she
That's a
would
totally
remember it.
different situation.
And so, but even with the growing up or helping my sons, even mentioning things to them as that parent to them, you know, this action's going to have this consequence if you're going to do this, you know, to answer a little bit of that question. If you're going to do this, and the extreme consequences, you might go to jail, for whatever it is, you know. And as a parent, I did have to say that moment. And if you go there, I'm going to let you sit overnight, and I'll be, you know, eventually go, just so that there's a little bit of fear. But at the same time, as a parent, I know as soon as that call comes up, I'm out the door.
Yeah. And see, and this is the thing, that's what I want to touch on. I was like, I'm going to get all the negative stuff out the way, but I think we become stronger than most people.
Yes.
I know I have fortitude I would have never gotten if I wasn't around people who were having so much trouble.
Yes.
And so there is like a superhero kind of archetype there. Like, it's undeniable. I don't necessarily feel it. I'm still a dynamic person. I have emotions. I'm still going to like have the resentment, all this. But looking back, I'm like, well, I definitely have skills. Where like when I have kids, I'm ready for the teenage years, you know, because I'm taking care of full adults.
Right.
You know, so I think that's a huge plus. I think just above all, you could see like the extent of like human strength. Like that's one thing we know, and this is something I learned from learning about therapy. It's like they don't know the extent of strength. Like, so people can go in like just really weak and feel like the whole world's out together and they live with the cloud over their head, you know. But then like just within a few weeks they could totally change, and then just keep moving forward from like, hey, now I'm not taking any, you know, lip from my mom anymore. Yeah. And so like I don't have the resentment anymore, and then from that they're better at work, and then I asked for the raise, and it's just perpetual. It's like I see that in myself now. I'm like, all these skills I built from just maintaining presence, you know, kind of like a Zen, you know, martial arts style of like, you know, situations. My brother would, you know, a cop, my oldest brother actually. So I keep talking about my brother. He's actually my nephew. My parents adopted him, but his dad was like, he was kind of wild too. He's very settled now, but I remember very vividly like a cop car coming, dropping him off with his shirt off, like drunk on Hennessy. And I remember like him going to my room because he's like, let's kind of have him calm down. And I'm in there, and like he's just talking to me. Like I'm young, I'm probably like 11, and he's like telling me all these adult things and like, you know, going through his emotions and crying. And it's like I remember in that moment, I'm like, wow, like I feel like an adult right here, even though probably should have never gone through that experience. But I was like, this is cool. And like I always think about that later. It's like there's times where like adults, like people who should be strong, would break down in front of me just because, you know, my family has a lot of sensitivity, and just being there, it's like, oh, I can hold space at least. And then sure enough, throughout my whole life, there's instances where you hold that space, even for people who aren't like having major issues, you just hold space, and then there's just a massive respect. just being able to listen and then say something of encouragement or in depth, and are like, wow, like no one else is like you, kind of thing. And I've experienced that with people, like, oh wow, so like you build bigger bonds with that.
Definitely.
So, you know, it's as with everything, there's a duality. It's like you're gonna have to struggle with it, but then you get character.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Through perseverance, we grow. And I'm glad you described it that way, because the first thing that came to mind is emotional intelligence. And I think that's the difference between good caregivers and just people who don't even understand or recognize themselves as caregivers, even though they are in a role. Parents, to an extent, they don't recognize that. And that difference being the emotional intelligence.
Right. Yeah, that's huge.
We gain the skills, and as we go through those areas of duality, we get stronger. You observe, you learn, and it's like you put another tool in your tool belt.
Right.
You have this moment, this reaction, and so now I know how to deal with this. And maybe next time it may be similar, or maybe next time it's something entirely different, and I have to pull on other emotional skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then, as time has continued to go forward and you're learning how to be this caregiver for your brother, do you hold any guilt or shame wanting to move forward and live that life because you worried about what if I'm not there for him? But does that keep you from moving forward to live your own life?
I think in this case, when he moved here, I felt like I should at least just bring him into my world and make him feel like he has a place, and maybe get him interested. I wanted him to get interested. He made, mention of maybe wanting to produce at one point. So I brought him on a film set, and he was just real tired and didn't seem to really like it.
Not his thing.
But I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, maybe having a bad time, whatever. But like, it's hard to read him, but I can see like underneath whatever he's going through. I'm hoping it's because he's under 25 right now. He's a baby.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, once we get past this, I want to set us up to where when he's my age, we have something stronger. We can relate more. Because like, he's worlds away right now, like he was just of drinking age when he moved here. So like, I don't feel like I'm completely pushing away, because our worlds are different, but I do feel like I do want to bring him in certain situations, kind of like, come on another movie set and get to know people. But then he has like, he's very friendly and he can be polite, but there's things that just come out from like trauma that he can be abrasive and not really know what he's saying, or be insensitive. And so I worry of like, how much do I bring him to my world, or how much do I build my own world? And if I build my own world away from him, does he feel like that's a rejection? So that's what I'm constantly in. But I feel right now it's balanced enough to where I think he understands, well, Jared's off, he's doing these big things and he has these big projects to work on, and I'm just a young guy. So like, that's kind of my safety net for him now. And I'm hoping that he does really dig his roots down to something he's really passionate about. That way, I don't feel like I'm the only one there for when he needs help. Especially if he gets into a field where he's helping other people, that'd be tremendous. If he becomes a firefighter, like, because he does have empathy, like he does care, but there's that layer, that hard shell. Like I told a friend one day, I was like, we left South Louisiana, and I was like, if you hang out with us, you kind of have to like treat us like two people that got out of prison. Because you come from this world that's like, it's so wild. Already the culture is like wild, like the way we communicate with each other. But on top of that, we've normalized a lot of like whether it's drug abuse or just like a lot of things. And it's like, I feel like I'm still integrating into environments where like I'm trying to be more of my polite self and myself that's not like abrasive. So like, at least I can give him leeway there. Even though we came from that environment, I could see like he has a big heart too. He just doesn't have the training to show it. He has a dog that he loves more than anything, more than people. So that's a good start. And if he does get in a situation where he's, a fireman, then he actually literally gets to help real people out there. And I think that would help me, because I think in order for us to get along more, like he needs to be more sensitive to like my personality, which is like I don't want to be talked down to, like I don't want to be treated these certain ways, right? It's like for him to like treat me like I'm his age, or like he's like I'm like he's childish about it, you know. So I'm hoping after he grows out of that, then I won't feel like I am disconnecting and moving my own way, but I'm definitely moving my own way. Like I have no choice, you know.
Yeah, because someday you're going to meet the special person.
Right.
You may begin to grow a family and
then you're bringing him into that environment and you're like, what's he going to be like at the barbecue? So yeah. And I'm not so worried. It's like, and I do become more worried about the people around me that I introduce him to, you know, because they've recently been experiences. Like I invite him over and he'll just say something. I was like, that sounds almost racist that you shouldn't say that. But because he's so disconnected, he's still learning that, you know, it's just going to come out that way. I realize my brother sounds wild and crazy, but I'm like, most of it's just being Cajun plus having like whatever he's dealing with as far as, moving on. Yeah, definitely moving on.
Sam, but that's what we do. That's what I think, like I mentioned, that we normalized the behavior that mom had for so many years. We either learned how to live around her or we learned how to avoid her and not be around her. And it was unfortunate, but when we do that out in society, we dismiss people because of those behaviors that we feel uncomfortable around. And it's hard to gauge someone's level of understanding, or because obviously if they're making comments or doing some sort of action and they're not kind of in that moment concerned with how it's affecting you, right, or you and or anyone around that's listening, men, women, children, you know, then you kind of, okay, do I distance myself? How do I diffuse the situation? Because I got to the point where I wanted to have, it gets very uncomfortable. When I was out in public with mom, I almost started to avoid going out in public with her because I felt like if I didn't have a business card to hand someone that says on there, person living with dementia, just to explain that, you know, I don't want them to see her as this crazy old woman. You know, I want there to be a little bit more empathy, but at the same time, I felt like I was leaving a line of people I was apologizing to as we left a restaurant or as we left any, you know, doctor's office even. I remember one evening we took her to go out to eat dinner, and there was a young couple with a child next to us, and this child got irritated. I think this little infant was probably less than 2, I want to say, was getting irritated and was crying. And my mom's response to us, I hope she said it quietly enough that it wasn't within the parents' earshot, but her response was, "Shut that effing baby up."
Wow.
And I was just, my face went, my hand went, it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So you remember how we were when we were little kids, and, you know, I don't care, you know. Yeah. It's like, how do you work in that moment? And all the emotions of, oh my gosh, that just embarrassed me. Let's just normalize it. Let's just not make a big deal out of it, so we don't exaggerate it any more than it already was. And then third, let's just get the check and get out of here. Yeah. Run.
Yeah. And it's difficult too, because like for me and my brothers, we go out and we seem like we're hanging out, we're having a good time. Plus we'll say something and you're like, okay, now I'm very much associated with it. Whereas like at least your mom, you can maybe say, well, like I'm her caretaker. I'm not going to say I'm my brother's caretaker. So I feel like, yeah, and that's where some of the guilt comes too. It's like, how often do I invite him to do things, knowing that, you know, and it's funny because like, you know, he'll do certain things and some people just love it and become better friends. Like, like they like that openness or whatever. So you just never know. It's like, I am kind of rolling the dice in that situation, but
it's uncomfortable. Well, and it's unfortunate because the rolling that dice, it's almost saying how much, like you have a boundary that's on a rope, you know, that little lifesaver, and you throw it out. How far do you let it float? Right. You know, it's just difficult.
Yeah, definitely.
So One of the things I did want to point out is that as we started talking about bipolar disorder with my mother, knowing the differences between that manic depressive, and learning when to set those boundaries becomes part of the observation, and you start to get used to their personalities, their mood swings, their own trigger points, because that's yet another thing I have learned more recently is what people, what situations, what opportunities are triggers. And rather than run from situations anymore, I'm trying to just sit in the moment and feel it and observe it and understand it. But it also took me knowing what these situations were to understand them and to be able to sit in that moment. And so one of the things I did want to add to this is that when we talk about manic episodes or depressive episodes, so those moments that you're around and you're worried if he's going to say something or punch some guy in the nose, those triggers. So for many of us, we have our good days, we have our bad days. Sometimes we have a lazy day, and sometimes we have a real productive day. So that's normal. I don't want panic to be like, oh no, is this me? And I don't want people to look at others in a bad light, but just a considerate light. So if manic episodes, that's something that you can look at. That would include symptoms or behaviors that you see them with high energy, sleeplessness for days, or loss of touch of reality. And sometimes that loss of reality may have hallucinations or delusions or paranoid rage, those moments that come out. Depressive episodes, the opposite of the spectrum, includes low energy, low motivation, loss of interest in daily activities. They just want to sleep the day away. So then this question is, how soon can we notice this? Like, how early in life would it be? And this is something that is not usually diagnosed before the age of 15, usually between 15 and 24, and rarely ever by the age 60, 65. I mean, you're going to know it way before then. But there's such a spectrum of, like, the bipolar and the narcissistic behaviors, like you mentioned, that it adds to this caregiver stress, because if you don't understand what's going on, you're continually putting yourself into a situation where you're telling yourself, I have to be there, and you don't want to in some cases, just because the turmoil, you don't know one day to the next. I got to that point with my mom. Sometimes I didn't know one day to the next if she was going to be in a good mood or a bad mood. And I found myself giving in on some of my boundaries if it meant getting a better response from her or trying to convince her to be in a better mood, and it's just, some days I could help it and some days I couldn't. This is why I wanted you to be able to express your story and share with us, because there are the caregivers that are not necessarily the professional nurse level, that are home helpers, for example, that are stepping into homes, and they only have brief moments to work with individuals. They don't have, it's not someone they live with on a day-to-day basis like we have our loved ones that we live with. And so we're able to observe long enough to see the differences, what they're like in the morning, what they're like in the afternoon, what they're like in the evening, what have they been eating, how much did they sleep the night before or not, how much alcohol have they had or not, just all different types of things that would help us cue into that emotional part of it, emotional intelligence of, as far as intuiting how to react to them. So I appreciate you for sharing this with us and helping us see it from a different perspective, because caregivers come from all walks of life, and we step into so many different situations, and sometimes we become, because we let it go and that resentment builds and those boundaries are pushed, sometimes we become the ones that need the care as well.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. By the time I come here next time, I'll know for sure if my brother is bipolar. But after you read those symptoms, I'm like, I think 100%. Yeah, because he thinks so too. So it might be what I'm in for. So yeah, this has been great.
Well, good. I'm glad you were able to be here. I appreciate your time. And I hope this gave you all more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalizelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.